Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
So let me start with this question. Thinking about coming full circle for a moment. A lot of folks are complaining about popular music. We're complaining about some of the images that we see of blackness in film and television. One arena where we're seeing a revival right now is actually on Broadway. This might be one of the great moments of black theater, and one of the centerpieces of that is a remounting of Shuffle Along. What does it mean that almost a century after Noble Sissle and Eubie Blake mount Shuffle Along, that we're now talking about it again and having to put a focus back on an earlier generation of black composers?
Yeah, no, I think this is very, very interesting. And interestingly, paired with that, of course, is Hamilton.
Right.
So we have these two. Absolutely, it's wonderful that they're happening at the same time, along with Lion King and the other kinds of traditional things that you see us in. But the idea of black thinking in terms of conceptualists is what's important here, I think, with Shuffle Along. Because if you look at the books that they kept on all of the finances and the casting, if you look at those original cast books and cast cards and the scores, it shows us, it illustrates to us all the aspects of what black art is. It's the show of the face of our culture in terms of entertainment value, but there's the conception of that. There's the business,
infrastructure, right,
the infrastructure, what it takes to maintain that. All of those things are part of what black creative thinkers are about. So I think it's great. You know, it's great that it's in place. The thing that we miss also too much is the historical narrative.
Right.
That's the problem.
So we have young folks now for lots of reasons, everything from these devices to everything else, right? They typically are much more visual than they are sonically inclined, right? You know, they hear music, but they don't listen to music, right? I'm sure every one of you, even in dealing with musicians, have had the challenge of playing music for young folks and getting them to actually listen to what you're playing, right? Without it just being kind of background noise. So that, I think, speaks on some level to the kind of almost invisibility of black composers, right? And I'll give you an example. Here in Durham for the last 3 years has been a music festival called the Art of Cool, which is attempting to be kind of progressive black music, progressive jazz festival. Kind of a black South by Southwest, if you will. This year's headliner was Terrence Blanchard. And you know, you will hear young folks go, Terrence Blanchard, I've never really listened to Terrence Blanchard before. It's like, if you've seen any Spike Lee film, you've been listening to Terrence Blanchard consistently for the last 20 years, but because you don't see his face and you don't see him in the music video, you don't have a visual component to that, you don't actually know that you're listening to a black composer. How do you find that balance between the work, the brilliance that black composers do, and the kind of invisibility of them at the same time?
We have in this room some of the most brilliant people who represent that family. And I think all of them will get a chance to talk to you about. We're also teachers as well. We're creators, but we're teachers. And we do have this challenge that you're talking about. And so the bridge is difficult. We see someone like a Robert Glasper or an Esperanza Spalding who are sampling important parts of the culture. Even Kendrick Lamar sampling.
Or more importantly, Terrence Martin, who is a producer, right, is a jazz cat, right? Jazz and gospel cat, right?
So that's wonderful that that's getting in the mainstream again. But this group, this special group that we're looking at, the Black Beethovens in America, that's the group that no one's tapped into yet. There should be a musical on Broadway that actually follows the life of all these creators.
Or at least a documentary.
Yeah, something to that effect. So that's where we're working. You're absolutely right. That's where we have to do the work. And then the whole issue of cultural relevance. The fight that anybody is having, whether it's art music or plays for that matter, even getting people to go or read a book for that matter, is the idea of what's culturally relevant. And that paradigm, that definition continues to shift with each generation, which is all right. But we have to have an important dance and discussion about what that is so that we can keep all of the pieces on the table that help to define what this is about.
You know, you mentioned the late David Baker. Of course, we could reference T.J. Anderson. as one of the folks, talking about the older guard, in this regard. There's an element of this in which, American society, generally speaking, has never thought of black composers as being capable of producing serious music, right? That's part of the gap, right? The gap is young black folks who don't know this even exists,
right.
Versus institutions, whether or not it's the places where you are teaching or conservatories or what have you, who are just not inclined to think about black composers making serious music or music that they think of as serious on a certain level of ilk, right?
Yeah. I think everyone that's in the art music world, from the vocalists and instrumentalists, but certainly the composers, we think we get hit the hardest with the critique, the jettison of us out of the frame. Because this is why I think, and my colleagues here will maybe disagree, I'm sure many of them will. I think the Academy has a problem with the recognition of black achievement in general and black thinkers in general.
No argument with you there.
So they want to move them off the table.
Yeah.
In music, the highest lady or the highest guy in this whole circle, this whole pyramid, is the composer. Yeah. He or she is the thinker that brings everybody together, that organizes the music. And when you take that role away from black artists, you only leave them with the entertaining, the bamboozle narrative, okay?
Right.
And that's what we fight as well. We want to also bring that to the Academy, that there's a history of black contribution in classical music that goes way back. I mean, Chevalier de St. Georges is writing and competing with Mozart, you know what I'm saying? I mean, this has been constantly a part of the narrative that gets left out. And so we can't stop. T.J. Anderson, Hale Smith, Dorothy Rudd Moore, I mean, any of our elders are telling us, keep the fire on them. Keep the fire on them.
And it's also a both-and strategy, right? Because, I know you have jazz recordings. Like I look at someone like Guthrie that's kind of in and out, of the serious stuff, but also doing, much more accessible music. Anthony Kelly, who's in the back there, I've had the chance to teach with Anthony on 3 occasions now, 2 times for a Motown class, the 3rd time on a Philadelphia International class, right? And just what he was able to bring to the table as a classically trained composer, right, who's not really listening to pop music, right, but can pick up on some of the compositional strategies that are embedded, right, in Gambo and Huff or embedded in Holland Dozier Holland, that just illuminates the process in a way for both the students and also for me as his co-teacher. In that element, how do you find that balance between doing the both and, right, doing the good work, right, of the serious art music, but also being able to go in and out of that to do stuff that's much more accessible to a general audience?
If you're thinking about William Grant Still, if you're thinking about all of the black composers, William Grant Still fashioned his 1930 work, the Afro-American Symphony, based on a blues. So that's the kind of great model, but that's what the black composers have done before the other composers jumped onto it and made it a sporty issue. For us, it was a life issue. Right. We were using the different expressions of our culture interchangeably all the time in our music. And I think that's the fabulous thing when you have someone like an Anthony Kelly who understands that and can teach that and can show, here's some blues, here's Scott Joplin. Very, very much studying Chopin and everybody else, but also hanging out in the saloon, dealing with the folks, bringing their vision and their into the music. Right. And that's the great role and the charge that creative black people, and that goes across disciplines. It's not just music. We see it in literature, we see it in dance, we see it in painting. All of the creative arts and literature, along with music, have been a part of this grand dance to take the culture and put it in a form that's accessible, and then wanting to go to the Academy and wanting to go to Carnegie Hall and say, look, this is our art, this is an art form. We don't have to wait for Gershwin to affirm it. We've been doing it from the very beginning. So that's part of the fuss that we're in, and it's not over. I mean, it's gotten worse, actually. Most of us have been doing this for 30 years, are seeing less attention to this idea of black composers. When we first got involved with it, they were having contests all over the country, major symphonies. We're all the black composers, come along. We're gonna play your music, we love you, come on. That went away, and there's very few venues for us to do that.
Why do you think that's the case?
You know, in the moment of political craziness right now, I don't want to be the cultural conspiracist. But let's talk about that. I do think it's very, very conscious effort to shut that down. If you remember Neo-Soul, to me, to have in 2000, Jill Scott, Maxwell, D'Angelo,
right.
We were all like, all the musicians were, oh my God, black music is back.
People were playing Fender Rhodes.
Oh my God, right? Conception, poetry, the idea of thinking about the needs of the people, but doing it in a form that spoke the language of the people in a sophisticated way. Yeah. Why did they shut that down?
Yeah.
Why did they shut that down?
How much do you think resources are also a challenge, right? So we're here in North Carolina, right? And Professor Holly can speak to this, right? We're hearing reports every 2 years about the shutting down of the North Carolina Central Jazz Program, right? And in fact, the very Art Cool Festival I talked about, they were one of the opening acts. Both their vocal ensemble and also the big band. Specifically here in North Carolina now, we know that the state legislature, the state senate, is attempting to really gut financially at least 3 of these HBCUs, so they can't actually exist the way that they do now, even under the constraints that they're operating under now. So if you aren't able to sustain this, right, at historically black institutions, and then black genius and ideas in general is under assault, right, at these predominantly white institutions, right? How do you sustain this?
That's right. Well, I mean, one of the books that we have that we did was this idea of talking to all the composers about what is the difference between your training and what's going on. And across the board, when you talk to anybody born at the top of the century, and most of us got a lot of our music training in the public school system. That's where the difficulty or the stoppage happened of being able to harness.
I mean, Tim was talking about Cass Tech, right?
Everybody in here had a high school a glee club or.
Right. What, Jerry Allen came out of Cass Tech?
Jerry Allen,
all the folks came out of Cass Tech.
Dwight, all of us in Detroit went to Cass Tech. We had the greatest teachers who were great musicians, and they could spot the musicians and help to train them. Right. When they did the cuts in the mid-70s and the 80s of the cuts in the school, they wiped out what? Music. Because
even when you're not talking about the schools, right, you go to Jamaica, Queens, right? I'm thinking about this now because Tom Brown actually is playing at the BU Cafe this weekend. He grows up in Jamaica, Queens, right? Of course, funkin' for Jamaica. And it's like, and all these cats, Tom Brown, Marcus Miller, I mean, all these guys come out of Jamaica, Queens, and they learned music, getting music lessons from Ellington's band, right? When cats were, just living in Corona, trying to make a living when they weren't on the road. They're teaching all these young guys how to play the instruments, right? So you had the school thing, you also had the community thing.
That's right.
So if you weren't getting it in school, somebody in your neighborhood at the church was giving music lessons to get you to learn how to use the instrument. Even when we talk about the vocalists, right? I always use Mary J. Blige as a good example of this, right? Because, there's an argument to be made that Mary J. Blige sounds as if she is the product of this generation. But there's also an argument to be made that Mary J. Blige doesn't know what being in tune is. Right?
Okay.
Right.
Well, they got auto-tune these days.
That conceptually, she's just out of tune. And again, I can make a cultural argument for why that is.
It's the color of the voice.
That there's some cultural dissonance. Right, that the hip hop generation experiences. But like, if you're not sitting up in a church every Sunday listening to harmony, right, you might not know what being in tune sounds like.
But to the actual love of the church contemporarily, some of our finest popular music production is coming out of gospel music. All those. The new drumming techniques now are from these young musicians in the church. So we've got to kind of understand where the paradigm, when it shifts and where the cultural vibrations and impulses shift, and still keep everybody talking. So because if it's there, then they could spread some of that to a hip hop generation understands what musical conception is. And so that's why it's important for us in terms of education and in terms of performance practice to continue to have the kind of dialogue. My big issue, and we have so many colleagues here that will share this with us, is that there is a lack of discourse among those disparate groups. So everyone's like, wow, I like what's going on in hip hop over there, but I also like what's going on in engineering here, in electronic music. I love the concert music, I love the church, but that would help us to keep this incredible tradition together and continue to move forward.
I think that's why what we saw, what Kendrick and Terrace Martin and all these folks did with To Pimp a Butterfly was significant. Because he had a collaborative spirit that brings all these folks together, right? So you have someone like Kamasi Washington. Young folks aren't necessarily listening to straight ahead, hard bop jazz, but you got a 35-year-old saxophonist who drops a triple album, right? And everybody wants to see Kamasi because they knew Kamasi was on To Pimp a Butterfly, right? You take Thundercat on the bass. You take someone like Glasper, right? Who has his hand on To Pimp a Butterfly, but it's not really his, it's not his project. But then he could do an acoustic project with the trio, right? Not with the electric band, right? And he's recording Kendrick songs, right, with the acoustic trio, highlighting the compositional structure of this without, so I think there is a moment now to take advantage of these confluences.
Yeah, those absolutely, completely get it. And I love your reference to Spike Lee, a generation seemingly even before that. Spike Lee seems old now. It's amazing. We've all grown up with this, but one thing a lot of my colleagues here would say is, why doesn't Robert Glasper and the hip hoppers sample for, in terms of film scoring, the actual music of black composers? We are the film score section. We write for orchestra, for opera, and they don't know about this group. So this is really important. I'm sure they would start to talk a little more to these kind of thinkers, and would be proud if they knew that there were this 150, 200 years of black composers who are in the spray and in the mix the same way Glasper is, or Esperanza, or Kendrick. We are in the mix. And that's a great group. It would be great if we could talk to them.
I'm just imagining what it would be like to find, 2 or 3 of the top hip hop producers, the really musical cats. And hand them Ellington's catalog and be like, do something with this. As just kind of a starting point.
Oh, let's bring back Jump for Joy, for that matter, because that was constructed in order to project out the beauty and the depth of black culture. We're not getting enough of those produced kinds of projects either, from all angles.
But that also speaks to the piece that you just talked about in terms of schooling and community, right? Where are the institutional spaces outside of cats who are actually going to be in music departments in college where they're going to have access to this, right? Because this is the thing, not all of if you look at the legacy of black composers, not all these folks are trained educationally in the way that we, they're not all coming out of conservatories, right? They're not all coming. Some of them are just good musicians who are growing up in communities where there are other good musicians.
That's right.
But we seem to lack those institutional spaces, outside of the educational process to be able to pass on these things.
Well, I think there's other people here who work not only in the institution, we do that too, but somebody like Mark Lomax, who is here, who works in community centers. We talk, I think even Guthrie Ramsey talks about, these kinds of theaters that are places where black people gather, and
community theaters.
We can do our thing and continue to make it rich and to document it, but to ask the critical questions about how that music gets represented and disseminated in a way that gives a bigger picture of black life and culture.
Because I'm not mad at Beyonce. On the one hand, get your paper. I can appreciate that, and Lord knows I can't think of another pop artist that we've seen in the last 30 years, save Michael, that has generated the amount of discourse that she has, and some of it is actually very good discourse, right? Very good and important discourse. But you do wish sometimes that there would be a kind of excitement about black musical production, for folks who aren't Beyonce, right? Who can't release a video album on HBO, where folks are just excited about the music. Though I will say that compared to 5 years ago, when I see the excitement, for instance, around, Glasper just today, dropped an album of Miles Davis recordings. that there's kind of an excitement about that we might not have seen 5 years ago about, from a release from a jazz musician that most folks, really don't know.
The problem that I see, look, when Lemonade came out, everybody was buzzing about what's she doing now. Formation represented a kind of moment, and there was a lot of talk, and that created buzz. But watch how the media does this. Then Lemonade, I'm writing, you both. Right on Lemonade, okay, turn your lemons in lemonade, okay, what does that mean? Unfortunately, the way the media and the cultural apparatus is set up is for buzz moments. Never a consistent, sustainable line. So I would love to take the energy and say, okay, there's enough buzz. What about the sustained line? So they start asking the deeper, longer questions. Then we get to the longer trajectory of what black artists have been doing or conception. But as long as we're in these buzz moments, we'll never get to conception and only production.
But it also speaks to the role that we have as critics in terms of countering that buzz moment. And what I will give, one of the things I will give Beyonce a lot of credit for is that Lemonade was a very collaborative project. Right, and so when you begin to unpack all the folks who were contributed to it, like one of my favorite directors, a lot of folks don't know about him, is Khalil Joseph, because he shot all these incredible videos around about Los Angeles the last couple of years with Flying Lotus work. So he's one of the one who shoots Lemonade, right? So this is an opportunity to talk about who Khalil Joseph is and the things he shot before, and folks who know Beyonce but don't know Flying Lotus get that kind of introduction. But it also takes critics who have the ability and the platforms to push away from the Lemonade narrative and to pull from that and go someplace else with the conversation. Right? So that's part of what you're talking about also.
And we appreciate you. I mean, we've watched your shows and we see you engaging with all these young scholars, and we've got a number of them here today, and they're dealing with identity, power, authenticity, all of these very cultural, these cultural themes that come up, they're important in the cultural studies arena that young aspiring scholars are doing. And we've been saying, yes, we want to be involved. We're greedy now. I don't mind saying it. We hungry. We want to be loved like Beyonce, and so we thank you for the attention to these issues, to talk about the longer conceptual line of thinkers in music particular, like these black composers, who are part of the important cultural buzz that's necessary to define what black art and culture is.
Are you worried at all about this genius being produced for the next generation, right? And I'll give an example, right? I grew up, my father, who is deceased now, loved gospel quartets and quintets, right? I grew up listening to the Swan Twirletones and the Swanee Quintet, and especially the Mighty Clouds of Joy and the Soul Stirrers with Sam and without Sam. And so in my mind, it's a tradition, right? But it's not necessarily a tradition I see being replicated going forward, right? For lots of reasons, right? But are you concerned that, even this body here, that you're worried about it being able to sustain itself, going on into the next generation?
Let's not go back to William Grant Still. Let's just go to Prince, who died a month ago. So I'm in my classes last week. I was in Cuba last couple of weeks ago, and my wife said, "You will not believe Prince died." I said, what, Prince Charles? I mean, no, Prince, and then, no.
That's not funny, but
no, Prince died.
Right.
What?
And let me say this, it's crazy because there's a way in which we all knew that Michael Jackson wasn't sustainable. Right? We knew that was not, so we were upset, but we weren't shocked. Right? Because all signs pointed to the fact that that was not sustainable.
That was good.
We expected to see Prince on stage at 82 years old, singing 1999.
Little Red Corvette. Little Red Corvette.
In a wheelchair.
Right. Look, when I got back, I was in such mourning. I played Prince DVDs where he's at his house in Minneapolis, the rave DVD, where in full power. My students were like, "What's up, old man? What's next?"
Right, and you're like,
I was heartbroken. Here's a guy that plays, produces, conceptualizes. He was the walking encyclopedia of R&B, funk, jazz. And when you lose an important person, like my students who are in there, I don't know what year they're born now. If this is 19, they're 18, 19, 20. No psychic, spiritual, aesthetic, cultural connection to Prince at all.
Yes.
What's next? I was heartbroken because these are great musicians we have. And for some of them, they just it's like, okay, and? So yes, if you think they're not thinking about Prince, right now, Biggie Smalls and Tupac is granddad for these kids, right? So the black composers or conceptualists in that regard have a tough fight. But we are all here to do it because we know that we're connected and that we make those connections to all the things that are going on now. And that's just our child. Amiri Baraka used to always say, that's the gig. That's the gig. So you can't complain. Can't complain. We have to stay in dialogue with the younger generation. I think Dwight is going to be, and a number of the composers are going to be doing a session about passing on the torch. Right. And that whole point of linking them so that we don't become old and crusty thinking we're doing the most important thing. The next generation has to define and defend this tradition as well. And that's what we're excited about.
Because think about the losses for a second, right? Think about the artists who really did work that middle ground, right? Yeah. So you go early to this year with someone like Natalie Cole, not just the linkage to her dad, but what she represented as high pop art, right, in the 70s and early 80s, right? Then you go to someone like Maurice White, right, in terms of a collaborative vision and conceptual. For many folks in the 70s who weren't taking composition classes, Earth, Wind, and Fire.
That's right, we were studying.
Was your introduction to like complex musical compositions.
That's right.
And pop music, right? And then even, on the heels of Prince, most folks didn't notice that Billy Paul.
That's right.
Right, and folks will think about Billy Paul as being like the one-hit wonder, right? Me and Mrs. Jones, and not only did he continue to record, well into his 70s, when you listen to the body of work, the stuff is classic. It just, it wasn't going to sell records, right? And he was okay with that. So when you got folks like this, and young folks don't know who the hell Billy Paul is, right? Let alone, having any kind of spiritual connection to Prince. It is worrisome about how this gets reproduced, right? And this is the irony of hip hop, right? For all our complaints about some of the narrative qualities of hip hop, on a sonic level, it has been our primary connection to an earlier archive, right? Even if some of those producers weren't conscious of the value of that archive themselves, sonically, right, it's the connector for a young generation to this earlier, generation of music and musicians and composers.
Yeah, that would not have bothered me, and it doesn't bother me until I've realized that hip hop is not in control of its own destiny anymore.
Well, I get that.
You understand?
At least the commercial stuff.
Yeah, hello. Right. And when you had, the early conceptions from, Joseph Sandler to Kool Herc, all those guys in the 80s, they were concerned about their community. They were concerned about how the narrative was a griot narrative. And that was important for those thinkers and those performers in community to be thinking about the community. But when that that agenda got snatched away and reconfigured into a configuration of commodity, then we lost hip hop. That's when we can fuss about it. You and I've been fussing about it for a number of years here. But who's in control of the music? And that's why the conspiratorial thing for me, and I only say that because it's in the news right now, is that when producers of culture are not the conceptualists of the culture anymore, that's a problem. And then when the younger generation don't understand what conception is, because they're patchwork identity. They take whatever's here on the internet, on Instagram, and that's my culture. That's where we are today. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, I was one of the folks that was actually happy that To Pimp a Butterfly didn't win Album of the Year. Because I think that changes the narrative of how we think about it, right? It still maintains a certain kind of outsider status, when it's not getting the greatest trinket. In the industry, right? And hopefully that means it also keeps Kendrick hungry in a kind of way that he even wants to. Because again, say what you want about where hip hop is now. This was an album that no one expected to sell the way that it did. It wasn't conceptualized for that. Right? He wasn't trying to sell 5 million copies, right? He was just trying to represent where he came from with some sort of complexity of art, and for whatever reason, because of the hunger. Really, that even young folks are having for quality music, they were drawn to to what it was.
You know, I have colleagues in the room that you'll get to talk to today who are like, if you say hip hop one more time, I'm going to take out something to take you out, okay? Because hip hop takes all of the oxygen out of the room.
No, I got you.
You know what I'm saying? And I got all respect.
It's like Beyonce. No, I got you.
And it's important. So we're at a place where we say, look, this is this generation's music and identity. So if you're black, those are your children. Those are our children.
Right.
So we have to be where contemporary. Right. But so the challenge that many of us have is this balance of saying that hip hop is a continuation of all the great black music, but we want them to understand that it's a stream of a continuum, and then it'll be a stronger hip hop.
Right.
And so that's a wonderful question, argument I know you'll have with our colleagues here today, is that hip hop does take all of the oxygen out of the room, and there's no other discussion about other kinds of creative black music, and that's what we're up against.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.